I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me.
The Gauntlet, the most infamous Iron Man grind. No other singular piece of content generates so much hate, causes so many people to de-iron or stop playing entirely, or, worst of all, create threads about it on Reddit.
Disgusting!
But the question is, why? Iron signed up for this, right? And it's only a 1 in 400 drop, it can't be that bad. Well, let's talk about it. The Corrupted Gauntlet grind, or more specifically the Bofa grind, is uniquely aggravating, especially when you go dry for it, and I'd say it's for two big reasons. The content itself quickly becomes uninteresting, and will be for the majority of the time that most players spend there, and the item you're grinding for is basically a hard requirement for a huge amount of content that you'll be begging to move on to once the Gauntlet lets you go. Let's start with the content itself. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually like the Gauntlet as a concept. It's like a mini dungeoneering raid. Damn, I actually miss dungeoneering. But anyway, yes, it's a good concept in theory. I found it super useful to help learn a lot of PVM concepts in a relatively safe environment. There's no supplies being wasted or death fees to worry about. It was only after I'd gotten confident with the Gauntlet that I went and actually got my fire cape. Yes, I am that much of a noob. This is all to say that I do think that the Gauntlet as a piece of content does a lot of good for the game. The problem arises once you're a few dozen completions into the grind. All RuneScape content is repetitive, that's to be expected, but the Gauntlet has you completing quite a long repetition loop where only a very small percentage of it is actually interesting or challenging. Okay, so when you're first learning it, everything is difficult because you have no clue what you're doing, but that keeps it interesting. But eventually you get the prep phase completely nailed down and you're basically never getting it wrong anymore. You get to the stage where you can comfortably get tier 2 armor, 2 tier 3 weapons and plenty of food and potions almost every single time. It's second nature then, and it becomes like a 6 or 7 minute unskippable cutscene you have to watch every time you want to fight the actual boss, which is the harder and therefore more interesting part of the content. But then you kill the Hunlef enough times and even most of that fight starts to become trivial as well. For me personally, the only part of the fight that gives me any trouble now is the very last phase, once his HP drops to the last third. My average CG run takes me about 10 minutes, yes that's slow, but if we assume that the last phase lasts about a minute, that means that 90% of my time with the content is the boring parts that I don't at all feel engaged in. Chill content is fine, I like to chill, but a man can only chill so much, and sometimes I want my RuneScape to be more engaging. But the Gauntlet, even in its corrupted hard mode form, can't provide that experience for me anymore. In a sense, I've gotten too good. Just a side note, if any of my audience are currently struggling with learning CG, please don't feel discouraged by what I'm saying. I promise it will get better. I struggled with it a lot as well first starting. Look how many deaths I have. This long lag time between completions can make it feel worse than your traditional grinds. If you ever do make a mistake and die during the boss, you haven't just waited a couple minutes like you do at some normal boss, you've wasted potentially 10 minutes of time with nothing but Eyes of Newt to show for it. That's a hell of a kick in the head, and a prime moment to log out in rage. You also have to wait all that time between seeing new drops. Rolling drops is a dopamine factory and we all know it, but a slot machine you can only pull every 10 minutes probably wouldn't sell very well. It just doesn't fire the dopamine in the same way as other content, and your brain will notice that. At least for other content with long completion times, they generally have a high percentage of interesting action in them, and the downtime is spread out more evenly to act more as a break between the challenging parts. Take Tombs of Amasket for example. The puzzle rooms at this point are basically just clicking on runelight squares, except for Monkey Room, but let's not go there. Each of the 4 fights is genuinely interesting, or at least difficult enough to not let you turn your brain off while doing it. You can also do it with friends, laugh at them when they fall down the baba hole, it's great fun. But for the Gauntlet, you're just there, all alone, in a prison of your own mind, waiting to be allowed out so that you can play with your friends again. So let's get into that. Why do we feel essentially hard locked to grind out a Bofa before we can carry on and do other stuff? Well, because it's a really good weapon, and no other weapon that you can obtain before it can fulfill the same role that it does. That is, as a very accurate and very high damage dealing range weapon. Nothing else comes close. I've been using this same rune crossbow for literally years now, and it's just not cutting it anymore. But okay, let's take a step back. Irons are pretty used to using underpowered weapons, right? You don't have to use the best weapon all the time in order to do the content, do you? I mean, look at the Abyssal Whip. you probably won't get one until you're well beyond the attack level you'd normally be able to wield it at. So you'll be rocking that dragon scimitar for a long time. Yes, that is true. But there's a distinctive difference between the type of content that you're doing with the dragon scimitar and the content you'd want to use a Bofur for. To get from your D-Simmy to your A-Whippy, you'll be doing Slayer. Most Slayer tasks involve killing low defense monsters, where the underwhelming stats of your weapon don't matter that much. Sure, the tasks take a little longer, but they aren't any harder, and you still hit them most of the time. But when you compare the effectiveness of a rune crossbow setup to a crystal one, the difference is night and day. Let's use a 300 invocation level Zebak as an example, and using the wiki's handy DPS compare tool, we get this when we compare them. An increase of 0.7 DPS, which is a 13% DPS increase, but the real kicker is the accuracy. You go from 57% to a whopping 70% hit chance. You will notice that. Hitting zeros is not fun, and you will be cursing it when it happens 3 times in a row. It gets even more obvious when you look at the hit distribution for the crossbow setup. 41% of your hits will be zeros. That sucks. But what's this little line all the way over here at 100%? That's the Ruby Bolt specs, and they are carrying your DPS. If we switch to Broad Bolts to remove them, our DPS absolutely tanks to a gross 3.3. Now, I have plenty of Ruby Bolts, that's not the problem, but they only have a 6.6% chance of activating, meaning it's wildly inconsistent on how much DPS you will actually do. Though, the sound effect is still one of my favourite things to hear in game. So now you're fighting Zebak with your crappy crossbow setup, and the whole time there's this little voice in the back of your head telling you how much better it would be if only you had a real weapon to use instead. You can try and silence that voice, but playing suboptimally just feels bad. The fun of progressing your account is about how you gain power and can defeat more difficult foes and defeat them faster. Kneecapping yourself by not using the best weapon just does not compute in that game philosophy. And there's so many things that the game will do to remind you that you're playing it wrong. Because your DPS is lower, fights take longer, meaning you take more damage, whether that's from crisps or from your own mistakes. So now you're more likely to die or waste more supplies. You might not even be able to finish the raid you're trying to do because your supplies run out faster than you can kill the bosses, even with minimal mistakes. I can do a 200 level raid TOA solo pretty comfortably with this range setup, but any higher and I start to struggle. If I team up with some mates I could do 300 plus, but I get the Leech Award every single time, which stings a little and it means no purples for me. Even though I'm playing it quite well, I just can't keep up damage wise with my teammates who own Bofurs and Shadows, even when I'm higher level than them. You don't feel like you're pulling your weight. You're like the little brother with the controller that's not plugged in. And this story is repeated for so many other pieces of content that you're going to want to do. Phantom Muspah, the God Wars generals, the Leviathan, heck, even the respiratory systems from the Abyssal Sire are improved with a Bofur. Just look how many wiki pages have the Bofur listed as a recommended piece of equipment on them. Any way you slice it, if you don't get a Bofur on your iron, you're doing it wrong. Okay, so that was a lot of words, so let's recap. The CG grind kind of sucks because it's 90% dead air, and the key items you need from it feel so bad to not have that they may as well be a hard requirement. Still with me? Well, statistically no, but I will keep talking anyway. So why does any of this matter? Well, because arguably it's bad game design. Obviously I know that's a very subjective thing to say, but I will try and rationalise it. High-level content requires you to use high-level equipment to complete it properly, but a significant amount of people trying to get that equipment will straight up not have a good time when doing so. When players of your game have a bad time, they stop playing. And this game, with its monthly subscription model, needs people to be playing as long as possible. So when you have parts of it that risk creating a potential quitting moment from your players, it's something that you as the designer of that game should probably look at. I want to be clear, I am not saying all this stuff because I personally want the grind to be easier. This is a matter of game design and patterns across large numbers of players, and I believe that in a numerical sense, the current system creates a lot of frustration for a lot of players and risks losing them as continuing subscribers. It's capitalism all the way down, baby! Now look at this graph. Alright, let me explain what I'm actually trying to show. I wrote some code to simulate 10,000 players all trying to grind an enhanced crystal weapon seed, which has a drop rate of 1 in 400. I kept track of what KC each player got that drop at. This graph shows a cumulative count of how many of those players are done at an ever-increasing KC. So around 6,300 of those players got the seed drop in 400 kills or less, meaning that 3,700 of those players are still grinding and are going quote-unquote dry for it. If we go to 1500 KC, we see that about 250 people still don't have the seed, and the final seed was acquired at a total KC of a ridiculous 3,459 KC. At 10 minutes of run, that's 576 hours, or 24 straight days of just Gauntlet and nothing else to get that seed. A normal person can't play 24 hours a day, so let's just say that they could play for 4 hours a day, every day. That's 144 days straight. If they started on January 1st while the New Year's fireworks were going off, they wouldn't finish until the 24th of May when summer was about to start. Most players will just quit before that. Maybe you're built different, but seeing these sorts of numbers makes me pray that it doesn't happen to me. Statistically, it won't be me, but it will be someone, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. 5 months of grinding before you can play the game again? That's just cruel. That's not a game anymore, you've built a psychological torture device. Am I being too dramatic? Maybe I should tone it down a bit. The point I'm getting at is that statistically, some number of real people are going to have to take many, many times longer to get the item they want compared to the average person. I personally don't think that's fair, and I think players in that boat are likely to be having a bad time and risk quitting the game, which is the opposite of what we want. But now we need to get to the question I've been putting off this whole time. The elephant in the proverbial room. Why don't you just de-iron? This only matters to Iron Men, since mains could just buy the item with the loot they get. And to that I say, yes.
Yes.
You are correct. This absolutely is an Iron Man only concern. But I don't think that really matters. People choose to be Iron Men because they find that it makes the game a more fun experience. They aren't going to want to throw all that away because of just one specific drop. Not when they've already come all this way to get there. You can try and destroy their feelings with facts and logic all you want, but game design is a science of feelings just as much as it is a logical one. A game system that creates bad feelings is a bad game system, no matter how correct it is on paper. If you ran a restaurant that served burgers and lasagnas, and the lasagna eaters kept coming to you and asking for some slight improvements to the lasagna, you wouldn't tell them to shut up and eat the burger. But Iron Men signed up for this. They chose to limit themselves. And yeah, they kind of did, but also not really. The time between starting an account and grinding for the Boffer can be literally years if you're not actively rushing for it. Not everyone has a perfect wiki level knowledge of the game and knows what's in store for them that far down the line. Players sign up to Iron Man mode because they want their drops to mean something, rather than everything boiling down into just GP per hour. They don't sign up to go dry on a Boffer, because no one expects it to happen to them. It's a human psychology blind spot, and I don't think we can punish people for that. I could make a whole video about why people play Iron Man mode over a main, but that's for another day. Like it or not, Iron Men are here to stay, and they deserve to have a good time just as much as everyone else. We all pay the same membership every month. Though, of course, I wouldn't want the experience of Irons to come before mains. That doesn't solve anything. So what do? Just give everyone a free Boffer at the start of their account so they'll shut up? No. And give me your heart because I think you've made me into a straw man. The main issue I see is the grind length variance. The minimum KC you need is 1, but the maximum is theoretically infinite. So let's focus on reducing that, or maybe getting rid of it entirely. The simplest idea is to just give people a guaranteed seed drop if they get to a certain KC without ever getting one, just like a Vorkath head. This puts a maximum limit on how long the grind can be, though you could still get lucky and get it early for your much needed Twitch reaction clips. The obvious downside is that some number of extra seeds will enter the game because of this, especially from bots. Now, I don't think it's fair to balance the game around bots because ideally we should be working to get rid of them anyway, and we shouldn't keep the game worse just because some people don't play by the rules. If we exclude bots from the equation, the total number of extra seeds entering the market I don't think would be that high anyway, as long as we set the required KC to a high enough number. Let's be real, how many mains are legitimately doing hundreds and hundreds of gauntlets for money making these days? Other than content creators making I only have a bronze dagger in my bank videos, it's not that common of a method these days. There's way better ones you can choose from. You do have pet grinders as well, and they will probably generate a few extra seeds in there, but I don't think most mains are interested in grinding the gauntlet for hundreds of KC. If we set the guaranteed drop at say 800, twice the drop rate, 1,400 people of our 10,000 Iron Men would be affected and be saved time on the drop. You could make it high, you could make it lower, but the point is to create a light at the end of the tunnel. Currently, a person at 400 KC with no drop doesn't know if their Mr. gets it at 405 KC or Mr. gets it at 3000 KC. With a system like this, there's only so dry you can go. Though, in some ways, it does remove the fun of never knowing what's coming in every drop, which is kind of a key part of RuneScape drop mechanics. So, what else could we do? Well, we could split the seed into parts. This is basically how the upgraded rings work from the Desert Treasure 2 bosses. You make each of those parts more common, but require the player to get multiple of them to be able to craft the item. For the sake of argument, let's say we split it into 4 parts and make each part a 1 in 100 drop. What does the graph look like now? Well, this. Notice the different shape. There are less people at the left edge now, meaning less major spoonages, but also fewer people at the right edge, meaning less major dryness. The maximum KC required is also much lower, about half as much as on the unsplit version. The overall effect is to reduce variance, though it doesn't remove it entirely. Yes, it does remove some of those amazing highs of getting the 1 KC drop, but it also reduces the amount of dire lows. But again, it will have market impacts. Since most mains won't grind the gauntlet that many times, most of them wouldn't have hit the drop under the higher rate, but they are much more likely to hit the lower drop chance in the few numbers of kills that they do. This is likely to make the new seed part item lower than 1/4 of the full seed price, thus making the seed cheaper overall. And we all know how much people hate to lose bank value. Though on the flip side, mains do get to see a unique and valuable drop more often, which might make this a more popular moneymaker. Those are some of the more basic ideas, but you could do something more crazy. You could make a super corrupted gauntlet that is even harder to do but with even better drop rates to reward skilled players with a shorter grind. You could introduce the ability to buy a Bofur by exchanging the other seeds you don't want, maybe at a rate that is so bad that no main would ever do it. You could even introduce a brand new item somewhere else in the game that helps to bridge the gap between a rune crossbow and a Bofur to make the item feel less required. These are just example ideas. Jagex of course has the final authority on how something like this would be implemented. They have much more of data available than I do. Heck, they could choose to do nothing at all and that would be fine too. I don't want to be the stereotype of the entitled content creator saying that my idea needs to happen or the game will die. I don't expect it to be able to influence change on that scale, nor am I even confident that what I'm saying is completely correct. I am just one very silly man on the internet after all. The game will be fine if nothing changes here, it's not going to kill it. The main point of this video is to explore why the Bofur grind causes so much hardship in the first place from a game design perspective, because that's always a fun topic to talk about. And with that, I think I've said everything I wanted to for today, so I'll leave you there. Be sure to click the buttons to make the numbers go up, and I'll see you next time. Peace!